The wolves circled him in the snow, their yellow eyes gleaming with hunger as blood poured from the gash in his thigh. And Samuel Xavier knew these moments would be his last, until an arrow whistled through the freezing air and struck the largest wolf square in the chest. Samuel's vision blurred as he pressed his gloved hand against the wound, feeling his strength drain into the white powder beneath him. He had been tracking a stolen herd for 3 days through the Sierra Nevada mountains, and his horse had thrown him when the pack emerged from the pines like gray ghosts. The fall had sent him tumbling down an embankment, his rifle lost somewhere in the deep snow above. Now he lay trapped in a small clearing, watching death approach on 4 legs. Another arrow flew, then another, each one finding its mark with deadly precision. The wolves scattered, their snarls fading into the winter wilderness. Samuel tried to lift his head, tried to see his savior, but darkness crept in from the edges of his vision. Through the haze, he glimpsed a figure approaching, wrapped in furs and moving with quiet confidence. A woman's face appeared above him, framed by long black hair, her dark eyes sharp and assessing. "Can you stand?" she asked in accented English, her voice steady despite the chaos that had just unfolded. "I don't think so," Samuel managed, his words slurring. "My leg." She knelt beside him, her hands swift and efficient as she examined the wound. The cold was numbing now, spreading through his body like ice water in his veins. He watched her face, noting the way her brow furrowed in concentration, the determined set of her jaw. She was Apache, he realized, and she was saving his life. "You will freeze if we stay here," she said. "My camp is not far, you must try." "Who are you?" Questions can wait. Now we move. She helped him to his feet, and Samuel bit back a cry of pain as his injured leg touched the ground. The woman was stronger than she looked, supporting most of his weight as they began the slow journey through the snow. Each step sent fire through his thigh, but he forced himself forward, leaning heavily on this stranger who had appeared like an answer to a prayer he had not had time to speak. The winter of 1878 had been brutal in the mountains above Sierra City, California. Samuel had heard stories of Apache still living in these remote areas, people who had refused to surrender to the reservation life that the government demanded. He had never expected to meet one, much less owe his life to one. The woman's camp was indeed close, a small shelter built against the face of a rocky outcrop, nearly invisible among the pines. Smoke rose from a carefully banked fire inside, and Samuel felt a rush of gratitude as the warmth hit his frozen skin. She lowered him onto a bed of furs, then immediately set to work on his leg, cutting away his blood-soaked trousers without hesitation. "This will hurt," she warned, reaching for a leather pouch. Samuel nodded, gripping the furs beneath him. She cleaned the wound with water heated over the fire, then applied a paste that smelled of herbs and earth. The pain was excruciating, but he refused to cry out, watching her face instead, focusing on the careful way her fingers worked, on the intelligence in her eyes. When she had finished binding the wound with strips of clean cloth, she sat back on her heels. "You are lucky. The wolves did not tear through the big vessels. You will live if infection does not set in." "Thank you," Samuel said, his voice hoarse. "You saved my life. I'm Samuel Xavier. Most folks call me Sam." She studied him for a long moment before responding. "I am Vina Chatto." "I do not think most folks call me anything." There was something in the way she said it, a hint of loneliness beneath the practical words that made Samuel's chest tighten. "Well, I'm grateful, Vina Chatto, more grateful than I can say. You should rest now. The fever will come soon." She was right. By nightfall, Samuel was burning up, thrashing on the furs as his body fought the trauma of the attack. Through the delirium, he felt cool cloths on his forehead, water being pressed to his lips. gentle hands holding him steady when the shaking became too violent. Vina tended him through that long night and into the next day, never sleeping as far as he could tell, always there when he opened his eyes. When the fever finally broke on the third morning, Samuel woke to find her sitting by the fire, mending a tear in one of the furs. Sunlight streamed through the entrance to the shelter, making her hair shine like polished obsidian. "How long?" he asked. "3 days since the wolves," she said without looking up from her work. "You are strong. Many men would have died." Samuel tried to sit up and found that while his legs still throbbed, the pain was manageable. "I need to get back to Sierra City. There are people who will be worried. Your leg needs more time. Another week at least." "A week?" Samuel ran a hand through his sweat-dampened hair. "I can't impose on you for that long." Now she did look at him, and something flickered in her dark eyes. "You can barely stand. The snow is deep. You would die before you made it halfway down the mountain. Is that better than imposing?" He could not argue with her logic, though part of him felt uncomfortable accepting such kindness from a stranger. But she had already saved his life once. What was a week of recovery compared to that debt? "Then I'll stay," he said. "And I'll try not to be too much trouble." "You are already trouble," Vina replied, but there was the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "But I have chosen this trouble, so I will endure it." Over the following days, Samuel learned more about his rescuer. She spoke sparingly at first, but as he regained his strength and began helping with small tasks around the camp, she gradually opened up. Her husband had been killed 2 years ago, she told him, in a skirmish with soldiers who had been trying to force her band onto the reservation. Most of her family had eventually surrendered, unable to endure the hardship of hiding in the mountains, but Vina had refused. "This is my land," she said one evening as they shared a meal of rabbit stew. "My people have lived in these mountains for generations beyond counting. I will not leave because the white man draws lines on paper and says I must." Samuel understood her anger, even if it complicated his own feelings. He had spent 5 years working as a cowboy, driving cattle from ranch to market, living the kind of free life that many men envied. But he also knew that freedom came easier to some than to others, that the law protected him in ways it never protected people like Vina. "I don't blame you," he said quietly. "If someone tried to take my home, I would fight too." She looked at him with surprise, as if she had not expected such words from a white cowboy. "Most of your people do not think this way." "Most of my people haven't had their lives saved by someone they were taught to fear," Samuel replied. "You could have left me to the wolves." "You had every reason to, but you didn't. That means something." Vina turned away, but not before he saw the emotion that crossed her face. "My husband used to say that we must judge each person by their actions, not by the color of their skin or the language they speak. I try to honor his wisdom. He sounds like he was a good man. He was. I miss him every day." The sadness in her voice made Samuel want to reach out to offer comfort, but he held back. They were still strangers in many ways, thrown together by circumstance. Yet with each passing day, he found himself increasingly drawn to her. Not just because she was beautiful, though she was, but because of her strength, her intelligence, the way she moved through the world with such confidence despite everything she had lost. On the 5th day, Samuel was finally able to walk without assistance, though he still limped heavily. Vina took him outside to check a line of snares she had set for rabbits, and he marveled at her knowledge of the forest. The way she read tracks in the snow and found food where he saw nothing but frozen wilderness. "You know this land like it's part of you," he observed as she reset a snare with practiced efficiency. "It is part of me," Vina said. "When you live close to the earth, you begin to understand its rhythms, its moods. The land provides everything if you know how to listen." I grew up on a ranch in Texas, Samuel told her. We raised cattle mostly. I thought I knew the land too, but this is different. Harder. Harder if you fight against it. Easier if you accept what it offers. They walked back to camp in companionable silence, and Samuel found himself wishing his recovery would take longer, that he could have more time in this strange, peaceful existence. The thought surprised him. He had always been restless, always moving from one job to the next, never staying anywhere long enough to put down roots. But here, in this hidden camp with this remarkable woman, he felt something he had not experienced in years. He felt like he had come home. That night, as they sat by the fire, Vina asked about his life. Samuel told her about growing up on the ranch, about his father who had died when he was 15, about his mother who had remarried a man Samuel could not stand. He had left at 17, he explained, and had been working cattle drives ever since, sending money back to his mother when he could, but never returning to the place that had stopped feeling like home. "So you are alone too," Vina said softly. "I suppose I am." "Never thought about it that way, but yes. I have friends in the towns I pass through, men I work with on the drives, but no real family. No one who would miss me if I disappeared. Someone would miss you, the people waiting in Sierra City." Samuel shook his head. "I was working for a rancher named McDonald, tracking his stolen cattle. He will assume the thieves killed me or I lost the trail. Either way, he will hire someone else. That's how it works." "That sounds lonely." "It is," Samuel admitted, surprised at his own honesty. "But I thought that was what I wanted. Freedom. No ties. Now I'm not so sure." Vina was quiet for a long moment, staring into the flames. When she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. "After my husband died, I thought I wanted to be alone. I thought the pain would be easier if I had no one to remind me of what I lost. But the loneliness is its own kind of pain. Sometimes I think it is worse." Samuel shifted closer, moved by the raw emotion in her words. "You don't have to be alone. Your family, they would take you back. To the reservation. To live on the white man's charity, to watch my people lose their pride and their way of life." She shook her head. "I cannot do that. I would rather die free in these mountains. Then you don't have to be alone here. I could stay." The words were out before Samuel could stop them, impulsive and reckless, but he meant them with an intensity that shocked him. Vina turned to look at him, her eyes wide with surprise. "You would stay? Leave your life, your work, to live in hiding in the mountains?" "I don't have a life," Samuel said. "Not really. Just an endless series of jobs and towns that all blur together. But here, with you, I feel like I have a purpose. You saved my life, Vina. Now let me save your heart. Let me help you carry the loneliness." She stared at him, and Samuel saw a dozen emotions cross her face, hope and fear and longing all mixed together. "You do not know what you are saying. The winter is hard here. The soldiers still come sometimes, looking for those of us who remain free. You would be giving up everything." "Everything I have is nothing," Samuel said firmly. "I mean it. I want to stay if you will have me." Vina stood abruptly and walked to the entrance of the shelter, looking out at the moonlit snow. Samuel watched her, his heart pounding, wondering if he had said too much too soon. But he could not take the words back, and he did not want to. In just a few days, this woman had become more important to him than anyone he had known in years. Finally, she turned back to face him. "Why? Why would you do this? You barely know me." "I know enough," Samuel said, standing and limping over to her. "I know you are brave and strong and kind. I know you saved a stranger when you could have walked away. I know that when I talk to you, I feel more alive than I have in years. Maybe that is not enough for some people, but it is enough for me." Vina's eyes glistened with unshed tears. "I am afraid. I was married before and I lost him. I do not know if I can endure that pain again." We could have 50 years together or 5 days, Samuel said gently. Either way, would you not rather spend them with someone than alone? She reached up and touched his face, her fingers gentle against his bearded cheek. You are a strange cowboy, Samuel Xavier. And you are an extraordinary woman, Vina Chatto. She leaned forward and he met her halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was soft and tentative at first, then deeper, more urgent. Samuel wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, feeling the warmth of her body against his. When they finally pulled apart, both of them were breathing hard. Stay then, Vina whispered. Stay and we will face whatever comes together. Together, Samuel agreed, kissing her again. The next weeks passed in a blur of quiet happiness. Samuel's leg healed well under Vina's care, and he threw himself into learning the skills he would need to survive in the mountains. She taught him to set snares, to track game through the snow, to identify the plants that could be used for food and medicine. He proved a quick learner, and Vina seemed pleased with his progress, even if she rarely said so directly. At night, they would lie together on the furs, sharing warmth and slowly opening their hearts to each other. Samuel told her about his dreams as a boy, about wanting to see the ocean someday, about his love of horses and wide open spaces. Vina spoke of her childhood, of learning the old ways from her grandmother, of the traditional ceremonies and stories that connected her people to the land. Do you ever wish things were different? Samuel asked one night as they lay wrapped in each other's arms. That the world had not changed so much, of course, Vina said. But wishing does not change reality. We must live in the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. The world as it has brought me to you, Samuel pointed out, so maybe some of the changes are not all bad. She turned in his arms to face him, her eyes soft in the firelight. You always know the right thing to say. That is not true. Most of the time I am stumbling around in the dark, hoping I do not say something foolish. Then you stumble very gracefully. They made love that night with a tenderness that left Samuel shaken. He had been with women before, quick encounters in saloons or brothels that meant nothing beyond a few moments of pleasure, but this was different. This was about connection, about two lonely souls finding solace in each other. Afterward, as Vina slept in his arms, Samuel lay awake and marveled at how much his life had changed in such a short time. As winter began to loosen its grip on the mountains, Samuel and Vina settled into a rhythm of life that felt almost normal. They hunted and gathered, repaired and maintained their shelter, and spent long evenings talking and making plans for the spring. Samuel fashioned a new bow for himself, and Vina taught him to shoot it with something approaching her own skill. They were becoming partners in the truest sense, each one's strengths complementing the other's weaknesses. But the peace could not last forever. In late March, as the snow began to melt and the first green shoots pushed through the frozen ground, they spotted smoke on the horizon. Vina's face went pale when she saw it. Soldiers, she said grimly. They come every spring looking for those of us who remain in the mountains. How many? Samuel asked, already calculating distances and escape routes. A patrol is usually 10 or 15 men, too many to fight. She turned to him, her expression serious. We need to move deeper into the mountains to places they will not go. Then we move. How long do we have? A day, maybe 2. They will search the lower elevations first. They spent the rest of the day breaking camp, packing everything they could carry and hiding what they could not. Samuel's leg had healed well, but he knew the journey ahead would test him. The higher mountains were more rugged, the paths more treacherous. But he had made his choice, and he would see it through. They left before dawn the next morning, moving quickly and quietly through the awakening forest. Vina led the way, her knowledge of the terrain absolute, guiding them along paths that Samuel would never have found on his own. They traveled for 3 days, stopping only briefly to rest and eat, always pushing higher into the mountains. On the 4th day, they reached a high valley that Vina said was safe. It was a beautiful place, ringed by towering peaks and fed by a cold, clear stream that tumbled down from the glaciers above. Wildflowers were just beginning to bloom in the meadows, and the air smelled of pine and new growth. "We will be safe here," Vina said, lowering her pack with a sigh of relief. "The soldiers never come this high. It is too far from their fort." Samuel looked around at the valley, imagining what it would be like to spend the summer in such a place. Hard work, certainly, but also a kind of beauty he had never experienced. "It is perfect," he said. They built a new shelter near the stream, this one more substantial than the winter camp. Samuel cut poles from the forest, and Vina wove them together with incredible skill, creating walls that would keep out the wind and rain. They covered the structure with bark and hides, and by the time they finished, it was as comfortable as any cabin Samuel had lived in. As spring turned to summer, they fell into a new pattern of life. The valley provided abundant game and edible plants, and they spent their days hunting, gathering, and improving their home. Samuel built a small corral for the wild horses that sometimes wandered through the valley, hoping to catch and train a few. Vina tended a small garden of traditional crops, coaxing beans and squash from the rich soil. In the evenings, they would sit outside their shelter and watch the sun set behind the peaks, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. It was during one of these evenings that Vina told Samuel she was pregnant. He stared at her, his mind struggling to process the words. "Pregnant." "Are you certain?" "I am certain," Vina said, her hand resting on her still flat belly. "The baby will come in the late autumn, I think." Samuel felt a wave of emotions crash over him, joy and fear and wonder all mixed together. A baby. A child. He was going to be a father. The responsibility of it was staggering, but so was the happiness. "That is wonderful," he said, pulling her into his arms. "That is the most wonderful thing I have ever heard." Vina clung to him, and he felt her body shaking with silent tears. "I am afraid, Sam. What if something goes wrong? What if I cannot protect our child in this place?" "You will not be alone," Samuel said firmly. "We will protect our child together. We will give them a life filled with love and freedom just like we have." "Do you really believe that?" "I do. With everything I am, I believe it." As Vina's pregnancy progressed through the summer, Samuel found himself filled with a fierce protectiveness he had never known before. He hunted with renewed determination, building up their stores of dried meat and gathered foods. He made the shelter weatherproof, adding layers of insulation against the winter cold. He prepared in every way he could think of, driven by the need to provide for his growing family. Vina seemed to blossom with the pregnancy, her body changing in ways that filled Samuel with awe. She moved with the same grace as always, even as her belly grew round, and she continued to work alongside him, though he tried to convince her to rest more. "I am pregnant, not sick," she would say with exasperation. "Apache women work until the day they give birth. I will not be weak." "You could never be weak," Samuel replied. "But let me take care of you, please." In the end, they compromised. Vina continued to do lighter work around the camp while Samuel took on the more strenuous tasks. They talked endlessly about the baby, about what they would name them, about the kind of parents they wanted to be. Samuel shared his fears about not knowing how to be a good father, and Vina admitted her own worries about bringing a child into their uncertain world. "But we will love them," she said one night as they lay together, Samuel's hand resting on her belly, feeling the baby move. "That is what matters most, love and safety." "They will have both," Samuel promised. I swear it." In September, as the aspens began to turn gold and the nights grew cold, Vina went into labor. Samuel had helped birth calves and foals on the ranch, but this was entirely different. This was the woman he loved, suffering through pain he could not ease, bringing their child into the world through sheer strength and determination. The labor lasted through the night and into the next morning. Samuel stayed by Vina's side, holding her hand, bringing her water, doing everything he could think of to help. When the baby finally came, emerging into the world with a lusty cry, Samuel felt tears streaming down his face. "A boy," Vina said weakly, cradling the infant against her chest. "We have a son." Samuel looked down at the tiny, perfect being they had created, at his small fists and screwed-up face, and felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is beautiful. You are beautiful. Thank you, Vina. Thank you for this gift." They named him Stephen, after Samuel's father, with the Apache name Nach, which Vina said meant mischievous. He was a healthy baby, strong and alert, and Samuel spent hours simply watching him, marveling at every tiny detail. The autumn passed in a haze of sleepless nights and overwhelming joy. Samuel learned to change the cloths that served as diapers, to hold Stephen against his chest and walk him around the shelter when he fussed, to soothe him back to sleep with soft songs his mother had sung to him as a child. Vina recovered quickly from the birth, her strength returning as Stephen grew and thrived. Winter came again, and this time they were ready for it. Their shelter was warm and well-stocked, and little Stephen seemed unbothered by the cold, bundled in soft furs that Vina had prepared. They took turns caring for him through the long nights, and Samuel found that even his exhaustion could not diminish the happiness he felt. "I never knew I could be this happy," he told Vina one night as they watched Stephen sleep between them. "I spent so many years just existing, going through the motions. Now I feel like I am truly alive." "You saved my heart," Vina said softly. "Just as you promised you would. I thought I would never love again after my husband died, that my heart was too broken to be repaired, but you proved me wrong. You showed me that love can grow even in the coldest, most difficult places." "You saved my life first," Samuel reminded her. "Everything good that has happened came from that moment when you shot the wolves. You could have let me die, but you chose to save me. Why? You never told me why." Vina was quiet for a moment, her fingers tracing patterns on Stephen's tiny hand. "I saw the way you looked at the sky before the wolves attacked. I had been tracking you for several hours, trying to decide if you were a threat. But when you stopped and looked up at the mountains, there was such longing on your face, such appreciation for the beauty around you. Most white men see only what they can take from the land, but you saw what I see. That is why I saved you." Samuel leaned over and kissed her gently. "I am grateful every day that you did. For you, for Stephen, for this life we have built together. It is more than I ever dreamed I could have." As Stephen grew from an infant into a toddler, Samuel and Vina's life in the high valley continued. They remained isolated from the outside world, seeing no one but each other and their son. Samuel sometimes wondered about Sierra City, about the people he had known there, but those thoughts came less and less frequently. His old life felt like something that had happened to a different person. Stephen was a joy, curious and energetic, with his mother's dark eyes and his father's smile. He took his first steps on a warm spring day, tumbling into Samuel's waiting arms with a delighted laugh. He spoke his first words in both English and Apache, switching between the languages with the ease of childhood. Samuel taught him to recognize animal tracks and the calls of different birds, while Vina shared the stories and traditions of her people. "He should know both worlds," Vina said. "He is part of both. We cannot deny either piece of who he is. I agree, Samuel said. I want him to be proud of his heritage, all of it, the good and the difficult parts. When Stephen was 3 years old, Vina became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she remained active and healthy throughout. In the early winter, she gave birth to a daughter, whom they named Victoria Naomi, with the Apache name Aleshini, meaning she plays all the time. Victoria was different from Stephen, quieter and more observant, content to sit and watch the world around her with solemn eyes. Samuel adored her instantly, this tiny daughter who seemed so serious even as a newborn. Now our family is complete, Vina said as she nursed Victoria, with Stephen leaning against her other side. Perfect, Samuel agreed, his heart so full he thought it might burst. The years passed with a peaceful rhythm that Samuel had never experienced before. Stephen grew into a strong, capable boy, skilled with a bow and comfortable in the wilderness. Victoria proved to be thoughtful and intelligent, always asking questions, always wanting to understand the why behind everything. Samuel taught them both to read and write, using charcoal on smooth pieces of bark, and Vina shared the traditional knowledge of her people, teaching them about plants and animals, about respect for the land and all living things. When Stephen was 10 and Victoria was 7, a group of Apache travelers passed through their valley. They were distant relatives of Vina's, people she had not seen in many years, and they brought news from the outside world. The wars between the Apache and the soldiers had mostly ended, they said. Many bands had surrendered and gone to the reservations, accepting the new reality of their circumstances. Life on the reservations was hard, they reported, but some people were making the best of it, trying to preserve their culture and traditions in the face of overwhelming change. You could come down from the mountains, one of the older men said to Vina. You and your family would be welcome. Your children could go to the government schools, learn to read and write, prepare for the world they will inherit. Vina looked at Samuel, a question in her eyes. They had built such a good life here in the high valley, but it was also isolated, cut off from everyone. Their children would grow up without knowing anyone beyond their immediate family, without understanding the larger world they were part of. After the visitors left, Samuel and Vina talked late into the night. What do you want to do? Samuel asked. This is your choice. I will support whatever you decide. It is our choice, Vina corrected. We are partners, Sam. We decide together. Then tell me what you are thinking. Vina sighed, staring into the fire. Part of me wants to stay here forever, to keep our family safe in this place we have built. But another part knows that Stephen and Victoria need more. They need to know other people, to understand the world beyond these mountains. I do not want them to go to the government schools and lose their Apache heritage, but I also do not want them to be unprepared for the reality they will face. What if we found a middle way? Samuel suggested. We could move closer to Sierra City, close enough that the children could meet other people, but far enough that we could still live on our own terms. I could find work again, bring in some money. We could give them the best of both worlds. You would do that, leave this place. This place is not what matters, Samuel said firmly. You and our children are what matters. Everything else is just details. They talked through the night and into the next day, weighing the risks and benefits of each option. In the end, they decided that Samuel's plan made the most sense. They would leave the high valley and find a new home in the foothills, close enough to civilization to benefit from it but far enough to maintain their independence. The journey down from the mountains took a week, with Stephen and Victoria excited by the adventure of it all. Samuel felt a pang of sadness as they left the valley behind, but it was mixed with anticipation. They were not running away this time, but moving forward together as a family. They found a place about 10 miles from Sierra City, a small canyon with good water and plenty of game. Samuel built them a proper cabin, working from dawn to dusk while Vina and the children set up camp. It took a month to complete, but when it was finished, they had a real home, solid and weatherproof, with separate sleeping areas for the children and a large central room with a stone fireplace. Samuel rode into Sierra City to find work and was surprised by how much the town had grown in the years since he had left. New buildings lined the main street, and there were more people than he remembered. He found work easily enough at a large ranch outside of town, and the owner, a man named Harrison, seemed unconcerned about Samuel's long absence from cowboy work. "You know horses and cattle, that is what matters to me," Harrison said. "I need men I can trust, and you came recommended." "Recommended? By who?" "Old MacDonald. He said you were tracking his stolen herd when you disappeared. Figured you were dead, but he spoke highly of your skills." Samuel felt a flutter of surprise and guilt. MacDonald had thought him dead, and Samuel had never bothered to send word that he was alive. But that was the past, and he was focused on the future now. He returned to the canyon with good news and his first week's pay. Vina greeted him with relief, and the children clustered around him, excited to hear about the town. "Can we go too?" Stephen asked. "Can we see all the buildings and people?" "Soon," Samuel promised. "But first we need to settle in here, make this place truly ours." Over the following months, their new life took shape. Samuel worked at the ranch 3 days a week, spending the other 4 at home with his family. The work was hard but familiar, and he found himself enjoying the company of the other cowboys, though he never told them about Vina or the children, instinctively keeping that part of his life separate. Stephen and Victoria began making occasional trips to Sierra City with Samuel, their eyes wide at the bustle and noise. Some people stared at them, at their mixed heritage and unusual clothes, but Samuel stared back with a challenge in his eyes that made them look away. His children were beautiful and strong, and anyone who had a problem with that could answer to him. It was during one of these trips that they met a teacher named Margaret Ross, a woman in her 50s who had come west to establish a school for children who did not fit into the standard education system. She approached Samuel and the children in the general store, her eyes kind and curious. "Your children look like they are full of questions," she said. "That is the mark of natural learners." "They are," Samuel agreed cautiously. "We teach them at home." "That is wonderful. But if you ever want them to have access to more resources, books and such, I run a small school at the edge of town. All children are welcome, regardless of their background." Samuel looked at Stephen and Victoria, who were watching Margaret with interest. "What do you think?" he asked them. "Would you like to go to school sometimes?" "What would we learn?" Victoria asked. "Reading, writing, mathematics, history, science," Margaret said. "And I make a point of learning from my students too. I would love to hear about your lives, about the traditions you have been taught." "Could we try it?" Stephen asked, looking at his father. "If that is what you want," Samuel said. "But your mother and I decide, understood. School is an opportunity, not an obligation." They talked it over with Vina that evening, and she surprised Samuel by being open to the idea. "If this teacher respects our children and their heritage, then maybe it is good. They can learn from both worlds, just as we always hoped." So Stephen and Victoria began attending Margaret's school 2 days a week, walking the 10 miles to town with their father when he went to work. They thrived under Margaret's instruction, soaking up knowledge like dry earth absorbs rain. But they also taught Margaret and the other students about Apache traditions, about tracking and plant medicine, about a way of life that was rapidly disappearing. Samuel and Vina's cabin became a gathering place over the years. Other families, both white and Apache, heard about the mixed family living in the canyon and came to visit. Some were curious, others were looking for guidance on how to navigate the changing world, and a few just wanted companionship. Vina welcomed them all, cooking meals and sharing stories, while Samuel played his harmonica, an instrument he had taught himself to play during the long winter nights in the High Valley. When Stephen was 18, he announced that he wanted to learn to be a blacksmith. He had always been skilled with his hands, and the trade appealed to him. Samuel helped him find an apprenticeship in Sierra City, and Stephen moved to town, though he came home every weekend to help with the work around the cabin. Victoria followed a different path. She had a gift for healing, learning everything she could from her mother about traditional Apache medicine, while also reading every medical text she could get her hands on. When she was 17, Margaret helped her apply to a nursing program in Sacramento, and Victoria left home to pursue her education. Samuel missed her terribly, but he was so proud he could hardly speak. "Our children are finding their place in the world," Vina said one evening as she and Samuel sat on the porch of their cabin, watching the sun set over the canyon. "We have given them what they need to succeed." "We have," Samuel agreed, taking her hand, "because we did it together. Because we loved them and each other enough to make hard choices." Vina leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever regret it, staying with me all those years ago? You gave up your old life for me." "I gave up nothing," Samuel said firmly. "I gained everything. You saved my life from the wolves, and I meant what I said. I wanted to save your heart. But the truth is, you saved mine too. I was lost before I met you, just drifting from place to place with no purpose. You gave me a reason to live, to build, to become the man I always wanted to be." "I love you, Samuel Xavier," Vina said softly. "I have loved you from the moment you said you would stay. You are the bravest man I have ever known." "And you are the strongest woman," Samuel replied. "We make a good team." They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had watched over them in the High Valley, through all their joys and struggles, through the birth of their children and the building of their life together. Over the years that followed, Samuel and Vina watched their children grow into remarkable adults. Stephen became a respected blacksmith, known for the quality of his work and his fair dealing. He married a young woman named Sarah, whose family had immigrated from Ireland, and they gave Samuel and Vina 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl who spent their summers in the canyon, learning to hunt and track just as their father had. Victoria finished her nursing training and returned to the Sierra City area, where she opened a small clinic that served everyone, regardless of their ability to pay. She married a doctor named James, and together they provided medical care to the growing community. They had 3 children, and Victoria made sure they knew both sides of their heritage, teaching them Apache stories and traditions alongside their formal education. Samuel continued working with horses well into his 60s, his reputation growing until people came from all over California to buy horses he had trained. Vina tended an ever-expanding garden and became known as a healer, with people traveling long distances to consult with her about illnesses and injuries that conventional medicine could not help. Their cabin in the canyon became a true family home, filled with children and grandchildren during holidays and summers. Samuel added rooms as needed, each one built with care and love. The walls were lined with memories, from the bow Vina had used to save his life, carefully preserved and hung above the fireplace, to drawings the grandchildren had made, to photographs taken with a camera Stephen had bought them as a gift. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Samuel took Vina back up to the High Valley where they had lived during the early years of their marriage. The shelter was long gone, reclaimed by the forest, but the valley itself was unchanged, still beautiful and wild and free. "I have been thinking about that day you saved me," Samuel said as they stood by the stream. "About how everything in my life led to that moment. Every choice, every mistake, every mile I traveled, it all brought me to that clearing where the wolves attacked. And you were there, against all odds, ready to save a stranger." "I do not think it was chance," Vina said. "I think we were meant to find each other. The spirits guided us both to that place at that time." "Then I am grateful to the spirits," Samuel said, pulling her close. "And I am grateful to you. You saved my life, and then you let me save your heart. You gave me a family, a purpose, a reason to be the best version of myself. I could not have asked for more from this life." "We have been very lucky," Vina agreed. "We found love when we both thought we were beyond it. We built a family and a home together. We have watched our children grow into good people. What more could anyone want?" They stayed in the high valley for a week, camping under the stars like they had in the old days. Samuel caught fish from the stream while Vina gathered wild herbs. They talked about everything and nothing, comfortable in the kind of silence that only comes from decades of companionship. When they finally returned to the canyon, they both felt renewed, connected once again to the place and the circumstances that had brought them together. As Samuel entered his 70s, he began to slow down. His leg, injured so long ago by the wolves, ached in cold weather, and his joints were not as flexible as they once had been. But his mind remained sharp, and his love for Vina never dimmed. They spent more time on the porch, watching the canyon and reminiscing about their life together. "Do you know what I remember most clearly?" Samuel asked one evening. "The moment you told me to let you save my heart. I was so surprised, but also so hopeful. I had not felt hope like that in years. You awakened something in me that I thought was dead." "You awakened something in me too," Vina said. "My first husband, he was a good man and I loved him. But what I felt when he died, that grief and anger, it had frozen my heart. You thawed it slowly and gently until I could feel again. That is a gift beyond measure." They celebrated their 30th anniversary surrounded by children and grandchildren. Stephen had arranged a surprise party, and the cabin and yard were filled with people, a mix of cultures and backgrounds that reflected the family Samuel and Vina had built. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, and speeches that left everyone wiping away tears. "You two taught us what love really means," Victoria said in her speech. "Not the easy kind of love that exists when everything is perfect, but the hard kind. The kind that persists through difficulty and change. The kind that requires sacrifice and compromise. You showed us that love is a choice you make every day, and that it is worth making." Samuel looked at Vina and saw tears streaming down her face. He took her hand and squeezed it, overwhelmed with gratitude for everything they had shared. As they grew older still, Samuel and Vina settled into a peaceful routine. They rose with the sun and went to bed early. They tended their garden and fed the chickens they kept for eggs. They sat on the porch and watched the seasons change, the canyon transforming from the lush green of spring to the golden warmth of autumn, then the stark beauty of winter before starting the cycle again. When Samuel was 77, he fell ill with pneumonia. Victoria nursed him through it, spending weeks at the cabin, but the illness took a toll. When he finally recovered, he was weaker, more fragile. Vina rarely left his side, and they spent long hours simply holding hands, saying nothing, needing no words to communicate what they felt. "I am not afraid of dying," Samuel told her one day, "but I hate the thought of leaving you." "Then do not leave yet," Vina said fiercely. "We still have time, I can feel it." And they did have time. Samuel rallied, regaining some of his strength, and they had 3 more good years together. They saw Victoria's youngest child get married. They celebrated Stephen's 50th birthday. They watched their great-grandchildren grow and play, the newest generation of the family they had created. On a warm autumn evening when Samuel was 80, he and Vina sat on the porch as they had thousands of times before. The sunset was spectacular, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold. Samuel felt a profound sense of peace settle over him, a contentment so deep it was almost physical. "This has been a good life," he said quietly. "The best life," Vina agreed. "I want you to know that I have no regrets, not one. Every moment with you has been a gift." Vina turned to look at him, her dark eyes still sharp despite her age. "Why does it sound like you are saying goodbye?" "Because I am tired, my love, so very tired. I think it might be time to rest." "Then rest," Vina said, tears beginning to fall. "But know that you have been loved, Samuel Xavier. Know that you made a difference. You saved my heart, just as you promised, and you filled it so full of love that it will never be empty again." Samuel smiled, reaching up to touch her face. "And you saved my life, not just from the wolves, but from loneliness and purposelessness. You gave me everything." He died peacefully that night in his sleep, with Vina lying beside him. She held him as his breathing slowed and stopped, whispering words of love in Apache and English, sending him on his journey with all the grace and strength that had defined their life together. The funeral was held in the canyon, with more than 100 people in attendance. Stephen and Victoria spoke about their father, about his kindness and his courage, about the way he had loved their mother with a devotion that never wavered. Friends and neighbors shared stories about Samuel's generosity, about horses he had trained and help he had given freely. But it was Vina's words that everyone remembered. "Samuel came into my life when I thought it was over," she said, standing straight and proud despite her grief. "He was a stranger, bleeding in the snow, and I saved him from the wolves because I saw something in him that I recognized, a loneliness that matched my own, a longing for something more. He asked to stay, and I let him, and together we built something beautiful. We built a family. We built a life of love and respect and partnership. He saved my heart, just as he said he would, and my heart will always be his. Until we meet again, my love. Until we meet again." Vina lived for 3 more years after Samuel's death. She remained in the canyon, tended by Victoria and visited constantly by her children and grandchildren. She told stories about Samuel, about their early days in the high valley, about the life they had built together. She made sure the youngest generation knew their grandfather, knew the kind of man he had been. She died in her sleep on a winter night, and they buried her beside Samuel in the canyon they had loved. The whole family gathered for the funeral, and afterward they stayed in the cabin, sharing memories and meals, celebrating the legacy of love that Samuel and Vina had left behind. Years passed, then decades. The cabin in the canyon remained in the family, passed down through the generations. It became a place of pilgrimage, where descendants came to connect with their history, to hear the story of the Apache widow who had saved a cowboy from wolves, and the cowboy who had saved her heart in return. The bow Vina had used to shoot the wolves was preserved and hung in a place of honor, along with photographs and letters and all the small artifacts that made up a life. The story was told and retold, embellished sometimes, but never losing its essential truth. That love can grow in the most unlikely places. That 2 lonely people can find each other against all odds. That the choice to save someone, to open your heart despite past pain, can change everything. Samuel and Vina's great-great-grandchildren played in the canyon, chasing each other through the aspens, swimming in the stream. They were doctors and teachers, artists and ranchers, a beautiful mix of cultures and talents. They carried Apache blood and Irish and Mexican and African American, a testament to the inclusive, loving foundation their ancestors had laid. On special occasions, the whole family would gather at the cabin. They would cook traditional Apache foods alongside dishes from all their varied heritages. They would tell stories and sing songs, and always someone would raise a glass and toast Samuel and Vina, the patriarch and matriarch who had started it all. To grandmother Vina, who saved a stranger's life, they would say. To grandfather Samuel, who saved her heart, would come the response. And then they would drink and laugh and love each other, living proof that one moment of compassion, one choice to stay, one promise to save a heart could echo through generations, creating ripples of love and connection that would never fade. The legacy of Samuel Xavier and Vina Chatto lived on, not just in their descendants, but in the values they had embodied. Courage in the face of difficulty, love that transcended boundaries, the willingness to take a chance on another person, even when every rational reason said not to. The canyon remained a place of peace and beauty, protected by the family who understood its significance. The stream still ran clear and cold, fed by the same mountains where Samuel and Vina had lived in their early years. The aspens still turned gold in autumn, and the wildflowers still bloomed in spring. The land endured, just as their love had endured, constant and true. In the end, theirs was a story of salvation, both physical and emotional. Vina had saved Samuel's life from the wolves, giving him a future he had nearly lost. And Samuel had saved Vina's heart from loneliness and grief, giving her the strength to love again. Together, they had saved each other from incompleteness, finding in their partnership something greater than either could have achieved alone. They had faced challenges and hardships, prejudice and isolation, but they had faced them together. They had built a family that bridged cultures, a home that welcomed all who came in peace, a legacy of love that would outlast them by generations. They had lived fully and loved deeply, and in the end, that was all anyone could ask for. The story of the Apache widow and the cowboy became legend in the Sierra City area, told in bars and around campfires, passed down through families like a treasured heirloom. Some versions were more dramatic, adding gunfights and dramatic rescues that had never happened. Others were more romantic, focusing on the love story at the expense of the harder realities of their life. But at its core, the story remained true to what had actually happened. A woman alone in the mountains had chosen compassion over caution. A man had chosen love over the familiar comfort of loneliness. Together, they had created something extraordinary, proving that the bonds between people matter more than the differences that might divide them. Their love had been tested by circumstance and strengthened by choice, becoming the foundation for a family that would grow and thrive for generations. And so, the story ended where all the best stories end, not with a dramatic conclusion, but with a quiet certainty. Samuel and Vina had lived and loved and built a legacy that would endure. They had saved each other in the ways that mattered most, and in doing so, they had created something timeless. Their love story was not just about them, but about the power of human connection, about the courage it takes to open your heart after loss, about the rewards that come from choosing love over fear. In the canyon where they had made their home, where their children had played and their grandchildren had learned the old ways, peace reigned. The cabin stood strong, maintained lovingly by descendants who understood its importance. The garden Vina had planted still produced vegetables, tended now by great-grandchildren who had never met her but felt her presence in the rich soil. The corral Samuel had built still held horses, trained by methods he had perfected, and passed down through the generations. And on quiet evenings, when the wind moved through the canyon just right, family members swore they could hear the sound of a harmonica playing, sweet and clear, accompanied by the soft voice of a woman singing an Apache lullaby. It was imagination, perhaps, or wishful thinking. But it was also a reminder that love like Samuel and Vina's never truly dies. It lives on in the people they touched, in the values they instilled, in the family they created. They had started with nothing but each other, two damaged souls finding solace in an unlikely connection. They had ended with everything that mattered, a life rich in love and purpose, a family that would carry their legacy forward. The wolves that had nearly ended Samuel's life had instead brought him to his destiny, to the woman who would become his partner in all things, to a love that would define both their lives. From that first moment in the snow, when an arrow had whistled through the air and changed everything, to their final moments together on the porch of their cabin, Samuel and Vina's story had been one of salvation and love. She had saved his life. He had saved her heart. And together, they had saved each other from loneliness, creating instead a warmth that would burn bright through the generations, a testament to the enduring power of love.